I'm Ruth.
I'm Ray. We go together like Beyonce and Jay.
No, Ray, we're
I don't know
nothing
what's
like
wrong
them.
with that. Tell me what's wrong with that.
We're nothing like
But
them.
they're ride or die like us, right?
You
That's
know what?
all.
I'm not that ride or die. I am
Fine.
not.
She's a Latina.
He's a gringo. I'm into culture and food and...
And I'm zero.
Why would you say that?
You're
do not
always
want
saying
zero
I'm into
on
boring
our
documentary
podcast.
stuff,
Oh
and
my
like
God.
you're into like cool stuff. Why do people want to listen to this? It's because we're different.
We go together like how and why?
But somehow it just works.
What are you guys doing?
Go back to bed, Pablo. We're just recording our podcast.
Everybody has a podcast.
Everybody has a podcast.
With Ruth.
And Ray.
Pablo, how do you spell vote?
V-O-T-E.
Yes!
Vote. Okay.
All right. Mommy and Daddy are going to do the podcast now.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. We're sitting here in the studio, and I'm wearing an I voted did you sticker. I went today to early vote.
Congratulations.
I'm hoping this episode drops a few days before the election because the guest this episode is Marc Morial, which is a big deal.
So to recap and really get like a timeline here, you met Marc Morial in 2016?
I met Marc at the very start of 2018.
Oh, okay. So in 2018, you met Marc and you documented his journey through being a modern day civil rights leader for how long?
I think we filmed for almost 4 years, and then we
Wow.
finished the edit over another like half a year. I think that whole production from the first meeting to the premiere was like a 4.5-year journey.
I think you're right.
We really finished shooting in early 2021, and then we edited and released the film in 2022 at Doc NYC. We were runner-up for the Audience Award. And then last year, it came out on Max, used to be HBO Max.
So if anyone's wondering what this documentation was for, it's for the movie, which we've mentioned before on this podcast, called Gumbo Coalition.
By Barbara Kopple.
And if you have Max, formerly known as HBO, you can watch it there. It's a great movie. It's an inspiring movie. And it really touches on two civil rights leaders, Janet Murguia and Marc Morial, during the Trump administration.
I'm hoping there's a lot of folks who are coming in after watching Gumbo Coalition and want to kind of hear a little bit more as to what happened to Marc and all the people they saw in the film, and you'll get that during the interview. For those who haven't seen Gumbo Coalition, maybe we could go ahead and play the trailer.
Yeah,
All right.
I think that's a great idea.
As a student of history, sometimes to get to the sunshine, you gotta ride through a storm.
We have to meet the moment. We have to fight back. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
Janet and I had worked for years.
I saw in Marc the importance of working across communities.
As mayor of New Orleans, we built a strong Black and white, Hispanic and Asian community that I call the Gumbo Coalition.
We create a path forward that embraces diversity.
We fight for criminal justice reform, the right to vote.
We're working together to get everybody out to vote.
Everybody's not against you. All I can promise you is we're for you.
We now deal with the most extreme anti-immigrant policies at the national level.
We're living our happy American dream, and it was just ripped away.
This is a moment not of politics. This is a moment of morality.
So this is personal for all of us.
When people work together, big things can happen.
Lifting up the hopes and dreams of all of us.
I can be this loud for my children. I will continue to do it for others.
Making this a better country.
What's the best cure for the pain?
Love.
Yeah, so I first walked into the Urban League in like the top of 2018. Patty Sellers and Nina Easton had done kind of a short film about Marc Morial and had come to Barbara Kopple and said, there's like a a full film about this guy and his family's history. It's incredible. And I think they were thinking this would be a past tense film about his incredible mom and dad and then Marc. But Barbara, being Barbara, she thought observationals. So me being her producer, one of 3 that worked on this, David Cassidy and Williams Cole were the other 2. Eric Foreman was a co-producer. We were trying to design, like, look ahead and be like, okay, if you're going to observe Marc Morial and Janet Murguia, like, what are we going to likely want to capture here? And we saw, I think, before Marc and Janet, that their whole story over the next couple of years was going to be about Donald Trump, really.
Right.
As much as they wanted to avoid that reality. We initially claimed to Marc and Janet that we were probably going to film for about a year. We wanted to be like a year in their lives. And then, but they knew that Barbara was, if her instinct was that we didn't get the story yet, keep going. We didn't get the story yet, keep going. They were like, okay. And then cut to, 4 years later, and it was like, all right, we finally got the story. Like, can we see a cut? Like, yeah.
I thought it was such a great choice to just keep filming because things really did get more and more interesting as the time went on.
Really, we found our film in 2020 after we'd already been shooting for 2 years, and the pandemic happens, George Floyd happens, voter disenfranchisement happens, and it all comes down to Marc trying to flip Pennsylvania, Janet trying to flip Arizona. We watched it happen, and I still get goosebumps. Everybody knows Martin Luther King, right?
Right.
But of course, he didn't do it alone in the original civil rights days. And basically a handful of people who were considered kind of the Mount Rushmore of the civil rights movement. And one of those...
Oh, I love that. I would love a graphic of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one of those was Whitney Young, who was the original, or one of the original leaders of the National Urban League. And there have been other storied National Urban League leaders since then, but Marc took over this illustrious civil rights organization that has that imprimatur. But, like, if we were just having on the head of the National Urban League and that was the backstory alone, that would be enough to consider it a pretty big deal.
Well, Mommy, you inspire me.
Oh, my. Well, you inspire me more.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of you.
So Marc's mother, Sybil Morial, who just passed away a little over a month ago, almost 2 months now.
Yeah.
It was a great loss. We got to know her making the film. So his mother, Sybil, and his father, Dutch, they grew up in New Orleans, and they were only like 2 or 3 generations removed from enslaved ancestors who had worked the fields of Louisiana. But the families had always been kind of go-getters, and so Sybil's dad was a doctor in New Orleans. They were well-to-do for Black Americans at that time.
So out of the segregation of the South, I finished high school and went to Boston University. That's when I met Martin Luther King. All the black students from BU and Boston College and MIT and Harvard, we all went to parties.
There's like so many things about that I find incredible about Marc and his family that I like forget big things like his mom was college buddies with Martin Luther King.
Right.
And there's this incredible photo of like all these like college knuckleheads basically at a party all kind of posing and one of them sticking out his tongue and it's young Martin Luther King with Sybil.
I love that photo.
Oh, it's so great.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
So what I love about Marc's backstory is that Sybil and Dutch is literally a civil rights love story. Like 1953, the Supreme Court decides segregation can't continue, and it gives birth to this movement among young people. Could we really, get to the promised land here? And they start talking, Sybil and Dutch, and they like fall in love with each other and are dating in the midst of being part of the early movement. So then, as Marc says in the movie, Dutch came to realize that after the accomplishments of the 1960s, that the next wave of the civil rights movement could possibly be in politics. It would be like getting the first black this and the first black that. And so Dutch runs, and he becomes the first black mayor of New Orleans in the 70s.
Now, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but where did Dutch get the confidence to run?
So some history buffs may remember that during the civil rights movement, Medgar Evers was the head of the NAACP chapter when he when he was assassinated outside his home. He was pulling into the driveway and he was shot. And at the same time, Dutch Morial was the head of the NAACP chapter in New Orleans. So there was this real fear, like, are we all going to be targeted?
Right.
And so I don't know what gave him the gumption, but the fact that he lived through that, stayed the leader of the NAACP despite that, of that chapter, I would imagine emboldened him that, like, well, we're not going back now. I mean, I'm going to keep marching forward.
So it sounds like the activists and advocates at the time gave him enough inspiration and influence to believe in a cause, and also to kind of maybe believe that whether he lived or died for it, it was worth it. And
Marc grew up basically looking up to Dad and looking up to Mom and thinking, well, I'm going to do this too. Marc becomes mayor of New Orleans. He was so popular that he hits his term limits. And when he finishes, instead of going on to, he doesn't go on to run for the White House or these other things. He takes over the National Urban League. He moves out to the East Coast, to New Jersey, with his family.
It was just meant to be where he is now. Some people are just born with it.
He starts dating this young reporter in New Orleans when he's mayor. And she is now Michelle Miller, the CBS News anchor that you may watch, his co-host of CBS Saturday Morning. We just watched her. She went over to Paris for the Olympics.
Right.
And was covering that.
Marc is this incredibly independent force.
What's up, Senator? Good to see you, man.
But really deep down inside, he really needs his peeps. And I'm his peep. I'm his chief peep. But he leans on us.
And then they have, Marc has 3 kids. They have 2 together. And we got to follow the family. So we got to see, they were in high school when we were filming. So we got to kind of see who looked like they were most taken after Mom versus Dad. We got to see Mason vote for the first time in a scene that I hear kind of lightly embarrassed him when he watched it at the premiere.
I love that scene. That scene is so relatable and so real.
Hey, Mason, you screwed this up. How? You're supposed to vote across.
Vote for 3.
Okay, vote for...
You voted for 5. You disqualified your ballot. But watch what you have to do. You're putting it in wrong.
It's upside down.
You're putting it in wrong.
It's upside down.
You're putting it in wrong. There's a window here.
It does matter.
It does matter.
Because if it's in there, it's not going to be taken.
Hold on. Push it all the way down first.
All the way down as it can go.
Oops. You gotta smile. Show them pearly whites. Show them pearly whites. Yay!
And I absolutely love that scene is in the film. It just shows you the human side of people who seem like they're almost hero-like, you know what I mean?
And Margeaux.
Or fake or phony. You think about, sometimes I look at people in politics or in leadership roles, and I'm just like, they seem inauthentic.
Yeah.
But Marc has never seemed that way to me. But I'm just saying, for an example, it's kind of nice to see maybe their kids or their spouse or whomever kind of bring in a sense of reality of their real life, that they're juggling these big things in government and politics, but also their teenage kids. So my question is, how did they decide to add Janet to the mix?
Yeah. Okay, so we meet...
Because we know now, and if you've seen the film, that they've known each other for a very long time. They worked together to get things passed. I mean, you didn't introduce them for the first time, but how was she introduced into this film that started with highlighting Marc?
So I couldn't possibly admire Marc more, which we get into during the interview for some of the reasons why. But I know he's the real deal. And I went into this film, this production, but the parties are 2 sides of the same coin, that most politicians are crooked, that there are no real leaders out there. Marc and Janet.
You were jaded. You were a little jaded.
One of the first things that he did that made me start to admire him or think maybe this guy's for real is at that first meeting in 2018 to pitch this project. First he says yes, but he also says this has to be a black and brown project. This has got to be, I guess we would say Latine now, but at the time this has got to be Latino American and Black American because that's the civil rights story right now.
Sure.
It's both.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there's not a lot of people who would get offered a documentary about them and then say, I'll only do it if you split the movie, take half of my movie away and give it to Janet Murguia because you got to follow both stories.
Wow.
And that's how that happened.
That's pretty amazing.
And she was always, I think, a little skeptical of us. And
well, we'll have to interview her and ask her that question.
Yeah. But, I mean, she went along because of Marc.
And she was great in the film. I mean, obviously. I think it's really hard to be in a position like that. How would you describe it, the kind of leadership positions that Janet and Marc have?
Well, they're actual leaders. See, I think to me, this is what I've learned as my years have gone on. When I was young, I was a critic. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of critics out there.
You were judgy.
They're not doing anything. Because when you actually do something,
mm-hmm.
like you're running UnidosUS or you're running the National Urban League, and you want actual results, like, you got to make some compromises. You got to work with the other side. So Marc has always done that. Marc has always been friends, and his organization, the National Urban League, has always been close with Republicans and Democrats. Mm-hmm. And then came the Trump administration. And I saw, when I first met him, I thought he was still trying a little too much and was still a little too optimistic about the possibility he was going to be able to work with that administration like he had
in previous
the Bush administration, et cetera.
Right.
There were so many like weird experiences over this production, but the one that was the weirdest to me was, again, early on, Marc was still hoping to be able to work with the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. He had tried to get criminal justice reform passed under Obama, and they just hadn't quite pulled it off. Mm. And because Kushner's dad had been a jailbird, Kushner reached out to like kind of a coalition of black leaders and was like, can we try to make a deal here? So we heard about this before this was public, and I was in a hotel in D.C. with Marc as he met Jared Kushner. Mm-hmm. And I definitely had mixed feelings. It was a little like a lizard person coming into the room. But here, I want to play, because this is one of my weirdest moments, and I've always thought about posting this online, and I might post it when we drop this episode. I'm not sure you've seen this exact clip, so I want to show you. Gary, are we good? How do we want to do this? Like, Jared's sort of waiting out there.
Yeah, just. You want to come in? Why don't you want to go follow him in, or you want to?
Can we how about this? Why don't we do it this way? Would you be willing to go out and we'll have Tina open the door for you, and then you can come in? Enjoy. So like that? Nah, you can just open it.
So Marc to come out and meet him in the
Marc, why don't you greet him at the doorway?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay.
Yep.
Hey, how are you, Tina? Good to see you.
You too.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, what's going on?
How are you?
So that was me directing Jared Kushner to go out the door and come back in again.
Well, he's good
Surreal.
at following direction.
And and the film really documents that turn as he realizes not only are we not going to be able to work with these people, but we're going to have to oppose them. For the first time, really. He had to like oppose
I guess it is
the sitting White House.
It's like pushing back.
Well, especially in 2020. That's like the big turn. George Floyd happens. Mm-hmm. There are protests for Black lives. Trump famously like tear gases all, the whole area outside the White House, and then goes and does that stupid photo op where he's holding the Bible and all that.
Right.
But there was also voter disenfranchisement efforts clearly happening, mailboxes being removed. Like, they wanted to disenfranchise as many people on the left as they could, but one of the easiest ways to do that was to target in on Black people and Latinos who vote for Democrats at a higher rate. So anyway, I mean, that was where like it kind of came down to like, all right, if you're going to try to stop our people from voting, we're going to have to get vocal and get out there and actually try to defeat you.
Mom, we got Trump out.
We got him out.
Hooray. Mr. President-elect, Madam Vice President-elect, let me just say congratulations to both of you on your historic victory in this election, for which we worked so hard to turn out a record vote in our community.
My overarching objective, we got to figure out how to unify this country. And you've been the leaders of being able to do that. I desperately want to work with each of you. And I promise you, you will have access to us on a regular basis.
Mr. President, I'm being told that you're over.
Yeah, 10 seconds, Mr. President. We take you up on your offer to meet with you regularly. We like to do it 4 times a year. Thank you.
And then, of course, January 6th happens.
I'm sending Janet a note. Hope you're safe amidst this act of insurrection and treason.
So I'm here on Pennsylvania Avenue. It's January 6th. Part of me wants to be out here to say, you know, this is my country too. And no one should be allowed, not even our president, to destroy our democracy and our institutions.
She's an amazing
I wanted to
person
ask
as well.
you, because the movie is ultimately about the coming together of Black and Brown as this coalition, really the only one that could take down MAGA, ultimately. Like, what's your take on that subject?
On two communities coming together to fight fascism?
Well, I'll be honest with you.
I'm kind of pro for it. Yes,
well,
I'm into it. I support it. It's amazing. Yes, more of that.
Okay, so I'll be honest with you. That was more of the warm-up question to the real question, which is, how is it possible that it seems to me that MAGA so clearly has attempted to attack Black people, and from moment one attempted to attack Latinos, especially like Mexicans.
Right.
How is it that over the last 4 years, more and more of that coalition have left the Democratic Party in favor of Trump?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and it is a very complicated and personal question. I mean, I personally cannot relate to the people who I kind of see as have converted. However, I have always told my friends and explained to my friends how in my culture, I'm Mexican, I was raised very conservatively under the veil of Roman Catholicism. And Mexico culturally is mostly Christian, mostly Catholic. And I remember telling my friends growing up, when the Republicans find out how conservative Latinos are, they're going to win them over, because Latinos are very influenced by what they do according to their values. And a lot of their values are conservative. Now, you may ask yourself, well, Ruth, if you were raised around a bunch of Republicans and conservative values, why are you such a crazy liberal feminist? My mom was kind of a rebel in her family. She broke a lot of rules and standards. She was the first woman in her family, I think, to get divorced. And unfortunately, that was an abusive relationship, which was very controversial at the time. And so I kind of learned that there were perks to not being so conservative and not following all the rules, especially the institution of religion rules, I guess. And then honest to goodness, I think it's also a lot of bad information. I think it's a lot of silliness on social media. I think it's like, you know, quote unquote fake news. I think all of this stuff has also unfortunately impacted for a lot of minorities, and not just Latinos and Black, a lot of other nationalities, a lot of other communities to support Trump. And by the way, I'm not against Republicans. I'm against people like Trump, personally. I just want to point that out.
Yeah, it used to be different. MAGA at one time was a separate movement from Republicanism, but I mean, I think the party is clearly they've crossed the Rubicon. I mean, MAGA and Trump are the Republican Party now.
Sure.
I don't really feel you can separate the two without doing a bunch of backflip.
How they've managed to get a lot more of the minority in their crowd, right? Like Black people and Latinos, who they have obviously offended and still keep offending up to this day with little remarks. I also think that it's an interesting thing where we're seeing where the Latino community is splitting against each other and the Black community is splitting against each other. And something that I've learned through studying wars and battles and even things like watching Big Brother or reality TV is that the way to win over an opponent is to destabilize them. And so I think they have been destabilizing our communities with, honestly, to me, their lies and misinformation. And unfortunately, people believe these things or trust these people for some reason. I can't understand it. I don't believe it, but I think that's what's happening.
I mean, I can totally understand how it would come off as racist for like the Democrats to simply expect like, hey, you guys have always voted with us. You're always going to vote with us, right? Like,
Totally. Yeah.
I can understand the whole don't take us for granted, okay? But when the guy rides down the escalator to announce his first campaign by saying they're not sending their best, they're sending rapists and murderers, and then says build the wall.
Well, I'm so honored that Marc said yes to us interviewing him. That was really cool of him.
All right, so yeah, we're both incredibly honored. Marc has been really nice to us many times, and now he's coming on our little podcast, and we wanted it to be longer, but Marc is the busiest human being I've ever met. He was basically like, I got to peace out, but I'm willing to come back on. So maybe he'll be a regular?
Well, maybe we can get him back on in January.
So we hope you enjoy our conversation here with former mayor of New Orleans, president of the National Urban League, Marc Morial.
How you doing? How's it going?
So Marc, all those zillions of times we were on Zoom with you during the production, this little kid Pablo in the background here is he was a baby, I think.
Yeah.
Hey, Pablo.
Yeah, just been he can't hear you.
He's
we got
on
him on
his tablet.
lockdown with the headphones. Say hi, Pablo.
How old is Pablo?
He's 5.
Just started kindergarten.
Man, let me tell you, that's one of the most enjoy every minute of it. We just became empty nesters.
We're going to ask you about that as we go through here. But so I was thinking if it works for you, I know you get interviewed many times a week and you've got your own show. I was thinking what might be unique and kind of interesting about this would be if it was tailored specifically to the audience that maybe knows you through the Max film Gumbo Coalition.
Okay. Just love to have a conversation.
Yeah.
You got it. You got it.
A guided conversation. Yeah, I mean, you are one of the great conversationalists. I mean that in a great way. I mean that in the best way possible. To tell you how sorry we were to hear about the passing of Sybil.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And, with the passing of my mom, I have gotten I have a box of wonderful sympathy cards and letters. It's just really been, and my brothers and sisters have gotten the same thing. So I am just grateful and thankful. Thank you. She was just an incredible woman and a great mom and for me, she was a confidant too.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's great that we got to capture the essence and wonder of your mom on film with Gumbo Coalition. And by we, I don't mean we, like me, because I wasn't part of the making of the film, but Ray and Barbara and the team.
Well, she enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah, she seemed so welcoming. She was in no hurry. I remember the crew hanging out in her backyard for probably 2 hours after a 4-hour interview. You know how these Barbara interviews are.
Yeah. I feel it's important to tell the story. A good part of her story is now being told through the news stories, and it'll be told through the memorial. Many, many things that people didn't know about her. Mm-hmm. Many things that happened in the 1960s, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and a little bit of what made our family what it is. And some people have said, well, I see why you are who you are, right? I understand you better because now I see your family upbringing and what motivated you. And that is so true. And I think Barbara, you guys did a masterful job. And look, there's so much raw footage we didn't use, right?
Right. So much.
So much raw footage. I'm like, boy, we could take the raw footage and make another story or utilize it in another way and shoot some interviews, and we'd have another film.
You mentioned like I think maybe there's 15, 20 minutes and they're very satisfying about your sort of background in New Orleans and your family's history. My God, I saw cuts that were 90 minutes of just that material, which is why I had actually wanted it to be a multi-part. But I think Barbara was ultimately right. I think it's a more satisfying journey at, what, an hour 40.
And it was a great, let me tell you something. Cinema veritas, I think is a term you guys use.
Mm-hmm. Verite.
Verite is really an interesting way because everybody's not all made up. It's not all clean edits. People see you in the flesh and in the real. And that's a really fascinating thing. I mean, I think it helps people really understand the real world. And look, it was one of the highlights of my life to work with you guys on this project. It's just created an appetite for me to do more.
Part of the reason I thought that you're that I really admire you and that I know you're the real deal is you mentioned cinema verite. Marc, there's a lot of people who have a lot less to lose than you who put up the armor when you try to do cinema verite and film with them over a long time because you can't hide. And you opened up your world completely to us. But we became invasive. That's what we do. And by you going along with it, we got the good stuff, right? That's how you do it in doc. Not everyone understands that. If a friend of yours called you up and said, Barbara Kopple and her team want to make a documentary on me, what should I expect? What would you tell them?
I tell them that they're going to intrude into your world a little bit. And you can set up a few guardrails. I wouldn't let you in my bathroom, in my bedroom, but, but I have lived my life in the public eye. And when you've lived your life in the public eye, you're used to some of the intrusions, right? And I think that's really the point. A lot of people are not used. I know people who don't like to have their picture taken.
Did you have to talk your wife Michelle into it?
Not really. I mean, she's like me. I mean, we're public figures. I mean, we're public personalities. I think the issue is just guardrails, and she just want to make sure she didn't do anything that would impact her career, right? But we're to some extent what you see is what you get kind of people. You know what I mean? We're just the way we are.
Yeah, I found that to be true. I do know what you mean.
And I'm not putting on or acting or creating. Some people have these, dark personalities, and then they light up
right
when the camera turns on, and then they go back to being a miserable individual, right? And we love people. We love people with all the good, the bad, the ugly, the smiles and the frowns. We love people.
Yeah.
And I find if you don't love people, this kind of work will wear you down. It'll wear you down because people are constantly placing their burdens on your shoulders, right? Placing your burdens on their shoulders. And I always felt, because of maybe the way I was raised, the community I was raised, I was built for it and I can handle it. And it's my, now, I realize it's my life. So I don't know if this wasn't part of my life, if I'd feel like a fish out of water, right? And you have to accept who you are. And I had a great time. Look, we were doing it during the pandemic, which created a different sort of thing. But I would say to anyone, it is an incredible way. And you have to trust Barbara and the filmmaker also to use discretion and appropriateness in the edits.
Yeah.
Sure. And I think it's always worth it, right? It's always worth it to get the voice.
She didn't use me. She didn't get nothing in the film that showed me cussing anybody out showed up.
Do you wish she had?
There may have been one or two instances where I got real animated and real fired up. But, if that had showed up, some people would have said, wow. And I'd have said, well, we all need to be real.
Yeah.
I try to be extremely respectful of the people who work for me. I don't believe in browbeating and being abusive. I think people who are leaders like that are not real leaders. But people get animated from time to time.
Well, we captured your son Mason and your daughter Margot taking their first steps into the kind of work
Yeah,
that you
boy,
do in
Mason.
activism.
And Mason was a little perturbed with me. But what you saw was the real Mason, and that was the Mason being Mason.
Well, they were so young, and it's been 3 years since we stopped filming. For those who watched the film and are wondering, what's happened in those intervening
So
3 years.
Mason's graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in May.
Wow.
He is now a banker with Deutsche Bank in their graduate analyst program. Right now he's in Germany, in Frankfurt, Germany, doing some professional development before he officially starts in about 10 days. Margot is a freshman at Howard University, and she is studying pre-med, and she'll be voting for the first time.
Oh, that's
In
exciting.
this election. Mason will be voting for president for the second time. Wow. And Kim, my older daughter, she had gotten married. Yeah, she got married and now has a 2-year-old daughter who's our first grandchild.
Congratulations.
Congratulations on all of that. That's big.
Does her husband still work with Speaker Pelosi?
Yeah. He works for Uber. He left Speaker Pelosi. Now he's an executive with Uber.
Good.
They moved to the private sector, and it's been joyous to see our 2-year-old granddaughter, Audrey.
I kept my sanity because I got to spend the latter part of the Trump presidency with you and with Janet Murguia and getting to see. I was hopeful. I was able to be hopeful when I think a lot of people who weren't along on that ride with you wouldn't have had the,
which is why going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, I do think there does need to be more mainstream programming on highlighting civil rights leaders and people who are actually in it, right? Like there really should be more, not only films, but like I would just love a series just following leaders doing different things. I think that would be so wonderful to watch.
Well, to paraphrase something you said in the movie, we've got a proof of concept.
Yeah.
Is there one question, all these screenings of Gumbo that you've been to, that you feel like you get the most? What do you get asked about the film?
It's funny. I think people want more. I think the question I get is, why isn't the Save Our Sons program everywhere in the country?
Oh, wow.
Why is it only in St. Louis? The question. I also think we kind of had this end, and we could have continued because the story continued. Mm-hmm. So I think people would like a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
I would love a sequel, a follow-up. I mean, it's like we made a full circle. We're back where we started in a strange way.
We are, and we're in another election cycle. The issues that we highlighted have become even more acute. Think about the fact that we were focusing on a very traditional, I wouldn't say traditional, but an immigration challenge of separated families.
Yeah.
And now we have absolute bizarre calls for mass deportations, allegations of people eating pets. I mean, it is even more bizarre, obnoxious than it was before. And for all the work we put into police reform, it still remains a problem. So I think it calls for a sequel. I mean, there was no logical place to end.
Right.
We sort of ended it around the election, but it's almost as though people ask, okay, did your work pay off? Did changing the leadership in the country make a difference on issues that you all were championing? I also think that there was some people said, wow, you should do a documentary that's focused on your entire life, right? People got an opportunity to kind of see a window into New Orleans, into the South, a tiny bit of a window,
right,
into it, but not a complete window into it. And then I think there's always everywhere interest in people who say, I didn't know the Urban League did that, or I didn't understand the work you did or the advocacy you did. I get that.
I didn't either. And that's one of the things that most struck me about the film is that you don't see stories of organizations like yours told that often, probably because the perception by the streamers and the distributors is that it's not going to be interesting, which of course
I don't think it's that
was.
it's not going to be interesting. I think that the problem with streaming and corporation is that eventually the end game is profit. And, making stories about civil rights leaders it hasn't historically been profitable maybe for streaming services, but maybe now there's a way to actually show that there is interest in it, there is an audience, and there could be ad dollars, I guess, to support these kinds of series.
And you can be on the edge of your seat watching Marc Morial try to fight for what's right in this country.
I would watch a whole season of that. Are you kidding me?
I've also thought that the other reason is that film, video, news love the sensational.
Yeah.
So, it leans into the headline news approach. And I always tell my team, saving people after they come out of jail, out of a period of incarceration, ain't sexy. It's not going on the front page. What will go on the front page of the news if somebody repeat offends.
Right. It's only sexy if it goes bad. But if it's
If it
as
goes bad,
successful as
so,
SOS
you're trying to
was,
tell-
then it's just somebody working a job and paying their bills and, living a happy life.
There's no question about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You and I have mentioned we've flirted with this topic a number of times when we've gotten together in the years since the film came out, a docu-series, because your work is never done, and we could do a sequel, and if Barbara was interested and you were, I would imagine that would be an amazing thing to do. But it's almost a shame that people aren't getting week-to-week real-time updates about where the civil rights fight is, where the work of the Urban League is, and then for those who admire you, where things are at with you and your family. I actually think it would be a hit.
The behind the scenes story, I think, is interesting to people because the front of the camera story, speaking, speeches, rallies, I think is interesting and I think it's fun. But a lot of people don't see the behind the scenes maneuvering. Like I'm spending a lot of time right now working on this big housing initiative. And, we're working with the White House. We're trying to get the White House. We are working with community leaders and bankers. We're trying to put together an odd coalition to confront the housing crisis in the country.
Tell us more about that initiative.
What I can tell you without violating any confidence is that it's all about creating a way to build, hundreds of thousands of new units of affordable housing.
So needed.
Unlocking a pool of money to do it in a way that I think is somewhat creative, that wouldn't cost taxpayers any new tax increases. It's one of these things that there have been at least 20 meetings, including meetings with people in the administration, but meetings amongst a coalition of us trying to strategize around this. Now, if it comes to fruition, there's a good possibility that we won't get a lot of credit for it. Because one way to make some of these initiatives work is to help get a politician to take credit for it. Now, I know that I borrowed lots of great ideas from others and made it a Morial administration initiative. Because sometimes that's what it takes. Now, I might give a nod, Ray, thank you. for helping me. Ruth, thank you for helping. You played an instrumental role, but I had to own it to get it across the line. So we get this done, there may be a whole, and that's the part of the work that people don't always see.
Yeah.
Right? It's the, it's the reason why I like Robert Caro and I like the work he did on Lyndon Johnson is because it shows the behind the scenes maneuvering that Johnson was so skilled at. Some of the documentaries on the 60s show Johnson talking to Dr. King, Johnson talking to Whitney Young, Johnson maneuvering, Johnson talking to members. That side doesn't get seen. And sometimes when you're in the civil rights space, people have this perception that you just show up at rallies,
right?
You do protests, you do litigation, or you basically sit in your office and take instructions. I mean, and I think the behind the scenes look.
Yeah.
I think it would be extremely fascinating. We did a little of that in Gumbo Coalition. We got a bit of it. We couldn't get everything we wanted because everybody doesn't want their meetings exposed, right? They don't
I guess that's a
want,
point in favor of doing a sequel that comes out 4 years later, as opposed to a docu-series that drops week to week, is that you could tell somebody like, I'm going to ask you about the Jared Kushner meeting in a little bit, but you could tell somebody like a Jared Kushner when there's secret things happening, don't worry, this isn't going to be out for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, right?
No question. And
yeah.
we look, the Jared Kushner meeting, when we began working on criminal justice reform in the Obama years, and there was this odd coalition that Cori Booker and Van Jones and a number of us were a part of. Hakeem Jeffries was part of it, and said that tried to find a consensus approach to justice system reform. It did not work. We couldn't get it across the line in the final years of the Obama administration. In the early years of Trump, because of his family's challenges, Jared Kushner took an interest, took a real interest in criminal justice system reform. And that led to a renewal of conversations, and it led to a new bill being introduced by Hakeem Jeffries and Cedric Richmond, and behind the scenes maneuvering by Jared Kushner. We had some in the civil rights community and in the justice reform community who didn't want to work with Jared Kushner for obvious reasons related to the 45th president. I took the position, I think Van Jones, Hakeem, Cori, several of us took the position, even though we never expressed it publicly. Hey, look, we have to try our best to make something happen. Take a shot and do something good, because we have not been successful in the past. Now, I look back, it's 2024. I distinctly remember in 2014, sitting in Barack Obama in the White House, not with him, but with Valerie and Sally Yates and a number of others, trying to hash out a justice reform bill that we could all support. 10 years later, the only step forward is the First Step Act. Experience told me, look, let's try to work with Jared Kushner because he's interested in this issue, and this may be the politics of strange bedfellows, but I had a conversation with him and I took away from it that he was not just looking for a Trump victory, but that he was in fact authentic about his interest in the issue, even if it was motivated by his family situation. People's experiences guide them.
But were you concerned about the optics? Because you mentioned like this meeting took place December 2018, and after that came things like Trump's response to the George Floyd protests, January 6th. I actually read during the investigation of January 6th that some of the meetings regarding the intended coup took place at that hotel where you met Jared. So when the film comes out, a year ago on Max and 2 years ago at Doc NYC, were you at all concerned about the optics and how that would
I think
be judged?
you're always in one way concerned, but for me, I always feel like I can take a punch.
Mm.
See, part of being an authentic leader means you can take a punch, not walk into a punch, take a punch. Because, as I said at the time, sometimes politics does come first. Sometimes the best interests of the people may not be consistent with political expediency.
Mm.
And I said, look, we might get, I told Rhonda at the time, I said, we might get hit on this. I said, but I'm prepared because we tried under Obama, we couldn't get it done. And by the way, Jared is in this coalition, but so is Van Jones.
Mm-hmm.
So is Hakeem Jeffries. So is Cedric Richmond, because when this thing was about to come unraveled, Cedric Richmond called me and said, I know you got people pushing on you. He says, but we got a shot and we need to try to do this. And Hakeem and I, who the two of them never got the credit they deserved because the media was so focused on Jared's role.
Yeah.
But the media they missed the coalition. They miss the bipartisanship. They miss the biracial nature. They miss the odd bedfellows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they missed it. But because we got it done, now the Biden administration has had the hand in implementing the First Step Act because serious legislation outlasts a single presidential administration. So it had no bearing on when Charlottesville happened for me to call out Trump, or no bearing on when January 6th happened for me to call out Trump. It was classic transactional politics.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a huge history buff, but what I find so fascinating about you is if you weren't running this incredibly important organization and at the forefront of civil rights, you could be running a great city like New Orleans, as you did. And if you weren't doing that, you could be a history professor at an Ivy League school and hold your own quite well.
I've always felt as an elected official and in the work that I do, I had to be steeped in history because it gives you perspective, and it gives you an opportunity to feel where you are. And I've been fascinated by the 20th century. And my fascination with the 20th century began when I took a course in high school, an elective course, my senior year in high school, and the title of the course was the 20th century. And we learned from 1900 to then 1975, all the trends. And what struck me is the magnitude of change. But it also tells me that, see, the 20th century was a remarkable century in humankind, in American history, but in humankind, because it was the century of a civil and human rights revolution across the world. Segregation, apartheid, military dictatorships, colonialism, all came tumbling down to a great extent. Think about Latin America, think about Africa, think about parts of Asia. The old world order came tumbling down in the United States. The 20th century gave us the empowerment of women. It created freedom for African Americans and other ethnic groups. I mean, this is what the 20th century gave you. It was a time, more change took place in the 20th century than probably took place in the previous 500 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I look at the 21st century, which was punctuated by 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina and the election of Obama and the Great Recession and wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, now in the Middle East, and in Ukraine. And it is not difficult to sense that we're in a period of reversal.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a period of reversal. And that's what it alarmed my mother before her passing. It alarms me today. It is why I think I've remained here doing this work, because if I wasn't doing it, I'd be doing it. You know, because it's an avocation, and it takes on a different importance when I look at my children, my nieces, my nephews, and that next generation, that broad generation, and what kind of world are they going to live in, and what are we giving them? We're going to hand them a wrecked, or we're going to hand them a nation and a world that's on a positive trajectory.
Still undecided?
Like I said I'm an eternal optimist, Ray. I think we can, but I think it's less certain. And one of the things that fascinated me was to go back and look at the age of darkness. I don't know if it's 600 or 700 AD, somewhere in that time period. The age of darkness and the age of anti-intellectualism.
Mm-hmm.
And what that meant. And when you look at American politics and dismissal of the truth, the abject lying that takes place without accountability by some, I wonder if we are on the verge of a new era of anti-intellectualism, where people scoff at being educated, being informed, being aware, having fealty to the truth. They just scoff at it.
So I guess my question for you, since you consider yourself an eternal optimist, is do you ever feel overwhelmed by how many issues, political issues there are on a general scope in the United States, and then you start thinking state by state, and then you start thinking city by city and town by town? Like, how do you, I guess, stay so positive?
I realize there's a coalition of the willing,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
the capable, and the passionate. I'm not by myself. I'm not alone. Many, and they're in many walks of life. Yes, they're in civil rights. They're in academia. They're in the faith world. They're in the media. They're in the community. And I get an opportunity to feel that way because I get a chance to move around and talk to people.
Yeah.
If I was isolated and my only lens into what other people thought is through television media, social media, but I get a chance to move around and hear, listen, talk to real people all the time, hear what they say, listen to their complaints, listen to their hopes. Mm-hmm. That's what energizes me, because the way I feel is shared. And I, as a leader, also have to channel those thoughts and channel that energy. So we're going to have to hop.
Sure.
And I can come on again at any time, because we're having a great time.
Appreciate that. We might take you up on that.
Ray, anytime. Ruth, thank you.
Thank you so much.
For everything.
Thank you.
Awesome. We really appreciate your time.
You, Marc.
Everybody Has a Podcast is a production of True Stories. Visit truestories.us for more. Follow me on Instagram at Ruth Vaca and at Veganish Vegetarian.
Follow me on Twitter at Ray Novoselsky RAYNOWOSIELSKI, and on Instagram at BigPlayRay2023.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and give us an awesome review. Everybody Has a Podcast is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. You know, you have to encourage people.
Copyright 2024 True Stories, Inc. Go vote, and God help us all.